It's not, adversity in its full sense, but actually it's been tough.
You're applying yourself when you don't want to.
But it's also it's the endorphins, whenever you...
The headline lands on millions of phones at the exact same second. William and Catherine have just delivered a shock decision on Queen Camilla's future. Within minutes, it is trending in 3 countries. Within the hour, clip after clip repeats the same 4 words: major announcement, shocking decision, future role. Not one of those clips shows William or Catherine saying anything at all. That is the first crack in the story. A check runs against the official diary kept by the royal household, the public record of who did what, where, and when. Camilla is still there. She is still listed beside King Charles III at a state engagement that same week. No resignation, no removal, no farewell tour. The paperwork that would exist if a working member of the royal family had truly been pushed aside simply does not exist. So the question changes. If there is no announcement, what did millions of people just watch? Somewhere, a headline was born out of a photograph, or a caption, or a guest dressed up as a leak, then spread faster than any real palace statement ever could. That is the first rule of this investigation. The loudest version of a royal story is rarely the most accurate one. The answer starts with a pattern, not a headline.
By the way, you be careful what you say now, because these guys, they're filming it.
I know.
Photographs from the past several months show William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, taking on more solo engagements, more high-profile appearances, more of the spotlight that once belonged almost entirely to the king and queen. None of it is confirmed as a message about Camilla, but once people start looking for a pattern, they rarely stop at just one. Hi viewers, before this goes any further, answer honestly in the comments. Did you already know that Camilla's title of Queen Consort quietly became just Queen once Charles was crowned? Or is that new information for you right now? Type yes or no below. That single word, Queen, is not decoration. It is the product of a decision made years earlier by a different monarch for reasons that had nothing to do with removing anyone and everything to do with protecting the institution from chaos after her own death. That decision is where the real investigation has to start, because somewhere between a woman once booed in the street and a woman now crowned beside a king, the record shows a transformation most people watched happen in real time and still do not fully understand. And somewhere between a prince learning the job of king in waiting and a princess stepping into a spotlight built for someone else entirely, the record shows a second transformation still in progress. Nobody signed a document ending Camilla's role, but something is clearly moving. The first clue is not a speech, it is a calendar. The calendar does not lie, and it does not wait for permission to be read. Pulled back far enough, the entire shape of this story sits in plain sight, written not in rumor, but in dates anyone can check. September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II dies at Balmoral after 70 years on the throne. Within hours, Charles is king. Camilla, married to him since 2005, becomes queen. William, at 39 years old, becomes Prince of Wales, the title his father held for over 5 decades. Catherine becomes Princess of Wales, a title left unused since Diana's death 25 years earlier. 4 people, 4 new roles, all in a single day, with no vote, no campaign, no debate on television. That is the first thing outsiders misunderstand about a monarchy. A government changes hands through an election people can watch unfold for months. A crown changes hands the moment a heart stops beating, and the paperwork catches up after. Here is what the record shows next. Go back further to February 6, 2022, 7 months before the Queen's death. In a written statement marking her Platinum Jubilee, Elizabeth II says publicly, for the first time, that it is her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort once Charles becomes king. It is a single sentence. It ends a debate that had run since the 2005 wedding, when palace aides first suggested Camilla might only ever be called Princess Consort, a title with no real precedent in British history. That sentence, from a 95-year-old monarch 7 months from death, is arguably the most consequential thing said about Camilla's future in the past 2 decades. Not a leak, not a tabloid headline, a public statement released by Buckingham Palace that quietly settled the fight the tabloids had been having for years. This is how monarchies move. Not through announcements built for cameras, but through slow, deliberate decisions made years in advance and only revealed when the timing serves the institution best. There is a second date worth marking on the same timeline. May 6, 2023, the coronation at Westminster Abbey. Camilla is crowned queen that day, not queen consort. Buckingham Palace had already quietly dropped the word consort from her title in the months before the ceremony, a shift that barely made headlines outside royal reporting circles, yet closed a transition that began with one sentence from an aging monarch and ended with a crown on Camilla's head at 65, 18 years after her wedding. None of this means the family is at war. A great deal of royal reporting treats every title change and every new patronage as evidence of conflict, when the historical pattern says something plainer. Every reign in modern British history has required this same quiet redistribution of duties, titles, and public attention long before the previous monarch is gone. So preparation, on its own, is not proof of a rift. It is simply how the institution survives its own mortality. But that raises a harder question, one the calendar alone cannot answer. Why, out of every member of this family, does Camilla's future keep pulling more attention than almost anyone else's? Picture the summer of 1997. In parts of the British press, Camilla Parker Bowles cannot walk into a public event without security bracing for the crowd's reaction. She has just been named, in the raw grief following Diana's death, one of the most unpopular women in the country. Newspapers run polls asking whether Charles should ever be allowed to marry her. For years, the answer is a resounding no. Now picture April 9th, 2005. Camilla stands at the Guildhall in Windsor, marrying Charles in a civil ceremony much of the family attends with visible reluctance. Even on her wedding day, the palace will not let her use the title Diana once held. She becomes Duchess of Cornwall instead, and aides say publicly that she is only ever expected to become Princess Consort, never Queen, once Charles takes the throne. That is the starting point most people forget. Camilla did not walk into the role of Queen. By design, she was kept several careful steps away from it for years, a distance measured out on purpose, one title at a time, so the public could adjust at its own pace instead of being told what to accept. What closes that gap is not one dramatic moment. It is decades of unglamorous, repeated work. Her first patronage, the Royal Osteoporosis Society, taken on in 1994 after watching the disease kill her own mother at 72. Her long, uncomfortable, necessary involvement with survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence, a subject most royals avoid because it offers no easy photograph. Her literacy campaigns, her animal charities, her decades of showing up to the unglamorous engagements that never make the front page. By the time Elizabeth II makes her 2022 statement, Camilla has spent 17 years building a public record most critics had stopped watching. Today, according to the royal household's own published records, she is patron or president of more than 100 charities and organizations, a portfolio built almost entirely after a wedding nobody wanted to celebrate. That is the real engine behind her rehabilitation, not a single publicity campaign, not one image. A public slowly willing to separate the woman from the scandal, one hospital visit and one shelter tour at a time. Still, rehabilitation is not the same as universal acceptance. Polling in the years before the coronation regularly showed a country close to evenly split on whether Camilla should ever be crowned queen at all, and some of that division never received a clean, official ending. That is the tension sitting underneath every calm, official photograph of Camilla today. The title changed, the record improved, but the emotional debate that started in 1997 is still being fought out in comment sections and headlines every single week, which leaves one more question the palace has never directly answered. What happens to that unfinished debate the moment a new queen, Catherine, steps fully into the spotlight instead? Two women stand roughly 10 feet apart at a state banquet, both in formal gowns, both smiling for the same bank of cameras. Within hours, half a dozen outlets run that exact photograph under wildly different headlines. One calls it a show of unity. Another calls it visible tension. Nothing about the photograph itself changed between the two stories. This is the machine that built the two women narrative around Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales. And it is worth naming plainly: no verified feud, no confirmed falling out, no on-record statement from either woman about the other has ever been published by a credible outlet. What exists instead is a well-worn media formula, one that quietly pitted Diana against Camilla for over 20 years and has simply found two new names to plug into the same script. But underneath the manufactured drama sits a structural reality that has nothing to do with personal conflict. Camilla is queen now, a role built on decades of earned trust and one specific sentence spoken by Elizabeth II in 2022. Catherine is Princess of Wales today and, under the line of succession, is positioned to become queen herself once William takes the throne. Two women, two different sources of legitimacy, two different points on the same institution's timeline. Royal historians describe this kind of transition with a specific phrase: the handover of the second chair. For centuries, the monarchy has needed one woman standing beside the king, representing warmth, accessibility, and the human side of an institution built on formality. That chair does not stay occupied by the same person forever. It moves, generation to generation, whether the women involved like each other or not. Royal commentators have suggested that some of what gets read as rivalry is really just two people at different stages of the same unglamorous job, representing the crown at hospital wards, homeless shelters, and school visits that will never trend on social media, regardless of who is doing them. Camilla has spent 2 decades earning the public's patience one quiet visit at a time. Catherine is now walking the same road, except every step of hers is filmed, measured, and compared to a woman she has never publicly criticized even once. None of that makes for as compelling a headline as feud, but it is closer to what the documented record actually shows. Overlapping schedules, overlapping causes, and two women whose public duties are converging at exactly the moment the institution is quietly preparing for its next transition. That overlap is not an accident, and it is not evidence of conflict either. It is what every monarchy in transition looks like from the outside, whether the public wants a calmer explanation or not. But roles inside a royal family are never only about who stands where at a state dinner. They are about who is being trained, deliberately, to eventually run the entire institution. And that story does not center on either woman. It centers on a man most cameras were not even watching. While every camera at the banquet points at Camilla and Catherine, nobody points a camera at a set of financial accounts sitting quietly in a government office. Inside is a number: £21.6 million. The private income William, Prince of Wales, received from the Duchy of Cornwall in the 2025 to 2026 financial year, according to figures published in the royal household's own financial reports. That number, not a photograph, is where the real story has been hiding. The Duchy of Cornwall is not a modern invention. It was created in 1337 by King Edward III, specifically to fund the heir to the throne, a legal structure so old it predates the English Reformation by 2 centuries. Every Prince of Wales since has drawn income from it, William included. It is separate from the sovereign grant, the public money that funds King Charles III's official duties, and separate again from the Duchy of Lancaster, which delivered £25.2 million in private income to the king himself in that same financial year. 3 separate income streams, 3 separate legal entities, 1 family. Here is where the offshore part of the story stops being speculation and becomes documented fact. The Crown Estate, the vast portfolio of land and coastline technically owned by the monarch but managed entirely independently, made roughly £1.1 billion in profit in a recent financial year, much of it driven by leases for offshore wind farms built across the seabed around England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. That surge is the direct reason the sovereign grant, the taxpayer-funded portion of royal financing, jumped by more than 50% to £132.1 million for 2025 to 2026. Nobody is hiding this offshore money. It is published, audited by the National Audit Office, and debated openly in Parliament every year. So the actual chessboard is not Camilla's title. It is the machinery quietly building William's financial and constitutional independence years before he ever becomes king, exactly as the duchy was designed to do nearly 700 years ago. There is a legal detail here too, one most coverage skips entirely. The Succession to the Crown Act 2013, in force since March 2015, changed the rules so a firstborn daughter can no longer be bumped down the line by a younger brother, but it only applies to royals born after October 28, 2011. It never touched William's position at all. His path to the throne was never in question. What was always in question was how much power, money, and public trust he would be carrying by the time he got there. Every pound in those accounts is preparation. Every added engagement on William and Catherine's calendar is preparation. Every quiet legal fact sitting in a statute book from 2013 is preparation. None of it requires Camilla to lose a single title, a single patronage, or a single ounce of public affection. But preparation this deliberate, on this scale, always comes at a cost to someone. Money moves. Attention moves. And somewhere in that movement, a person ends up standing in less light than before, whether the palace ever admits it happened or not. January 10th, 2023. Bookstores across the United States and the United Kingdom open before sunrise. Stacks of a single book climb toward the ceiling. Spare, the memoir of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. By the end of that first day, it sells more than 1.4 million copies, making it, according to Guinness World Records, the fastest-selling non-fiction book in history. Somewhere inside that number sits a version of Camilla the palace never approved and never fully denied. If you're just joining this investigation, drop a comment with the word record if you want more of these dates and numbers, not just headlines. This story only works if it stays grounded in what actually happened. In Spare, Harry writes about years of frustration inside the family, describing a media relationship he felt worked in Camilla's favor, sometimes, in his telling, at his and William's expense. He is careful, even in his own account, to say he does not consider her a cruel figure. What he describes instead is something colder, a family navigating image and survival at the same time, where every story that helped one person's reputation risked costing someone else theirs. Buckingham Palace has never issued a detailed, point-by-point rebuttal to Spare. That silence fits the pattern this investigation keeps running into. The institution rarely explains itself in public, which leaves memoirs, interviews, and old wounds to fill the space where an official statement should be. Royal commentators have suggested this silence is deliberate, a long-standing strategy of never dignifying a claim with a direct response. Others argue it simply reflects an institution that has never had to answer to anyone the way an elected government does. 2 years before Spare, on March 7, 2021, Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a 2-hour interview broadcast on CBS. They described real strain inside the institution, including concerns about mental health support during a period the palace has never fully addressed in public. The interview reopened a wound that never fully closed. The ongoing comparison to Diana, Princess of Wales, a woman who gave her own explosive television interview in 1995 and never lived to see how her sons would carry that legacy forward. That is the real cost hiding underneath every title change in this family. Not just who gets a crown, but who gets blamed, who gets protected, and who has spent almost 30 years being measured against a woman who never had the chance to grow old. Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in January 2020, a decision the press nicknamed "within days," and the family has never fully reconciled since. Camilla was not the cause of that decision, but every retelling keeps circling back to her anyway, simply because she is still standing at the center of the institution they left. But the family is not the only one keeping score. March 10, 2024, Kensington Palace posts a single photograph to mark Mother's Day in the UK. Catherine, Princess of Wales, surrounded by her 3 children. Credited to her husband, William. It is the first new image of her since planned abdominal surgery 2 months earlier. Within 5 hours, it is dead. The Associated Press issues a kill notification, telling every client to stop using the photo, citing signs the image had been manipulated. Reuters pulls it next, citing a post-publication review. Agence France-Presse and Getty Images follow within the day. 4 of the world's largest wire services have just done something that had never happened before with the royal-supplied photograph. They killed it. Online, the reaction is immediate. Viewers spot an odd seam near Princess Charlotte's sleeve, a misaligned zipper, a blurred edge by Prince Louis's knee. None of it is invented drama. Those inconsistencies are real, and they are the reason the photo agencies acted. Within hours, ITV's royal editor, Chris Shipp, publicly asks whether Kensington Palace has serious questions to answer, given that the source of the image was the palace itself. The next morning, a statement posted from Catherine's own social media account offers an explanation. Like many amateur photographers, she says, she does sometimes experiment with editing, and she apologizes for any confusion. It is a small, human admission. It does almost nothing to slow the story down. For 12 days, speculation about her health fills the space an official update should have filled. Then, on March 22, 2024, Catherine appears in a recorded video statement and tells the public what the surgery had actually found. Cancer, discovered afterward, now being treated with preventative chemotherapy. The wire services were not wrong to flag a manipulated photo. The public was not wrong to want proof that she was safe, but an editing mistake, magnified by an 8-week information vacuum that had already run since her January surgery, spent 12 additional days pretending to be a bigger story than it ever needed to be. Neither the palace nor the wire services broke any rule by acting the way they did. The system simply was not built to move faster than a rumor once real information stopped arriving. Evidence and assumption are not the same thing. This family has learned that the hardest way possible more than once, and the lesson still applies to everything being said about Camilla's future right now. Every camera trained on Camilla assumes her power lives in a title. It does not. Strip away Queen for a moment and look only at the paperwork the royal household itself publishes. Camilla is patron or president of more than 100 charities and organizations. She founded the Queen's Reading Room during the pandemic, a literacy charity that now reaches communities in more than 170 countries. She has been patron of the Royal Osteoporosis Society since 1994, 3 decades before Elizabeth II's statement made her queen in waiting. None of that came from a crown. All of it came from showing up, year after year, to causes most royals learn to avoid because they offer no easy photograph. That is the detail this investigation almost missed. A ceremonial title can be reassigned in a single sentence, the way Elizabeth II reassigned Camilla's future in 2022. A relationship built over 3 decades with domestic abuse charities, literacy programs, and survivor networks cannot be reassigned at all. It belongs to Camilla specifically, tied to her name, her visits, and her own mother's death from osteoporosis at 72. William could take over every formal duty in the country, and none of it would transfer that particular kind of trust. This is where the story quietly reverses. The visible spotlight, the engagements, the headlines, the balcony appearances, all of that can shift toward William and Catherine without costing Camilla anything that actually matters to the people she has spent decades serving. A domestic abuse survivor who met Camilla at a shelter in 2016 does not lose that connection because Catherine now attends more galas. In November 2022, Camilla hosted her first reception at Buckingham Palace as Queen, focused entirely on violence against women and girls, standing alongside queens and first ladies from other countries. That kind of gathering does not depend on how many engagements William and Catherine take on in any given year. Losing the spotlight and losing influence turned out to be two completely different things, and most coverage of this story never separates them. So the real reveal is not that Camilla is being pushed aside. It is that her power was never fully dependent on the crown in the first place. It was built the slow way. Through decades, most people were not watching closely enough to notice, and that kind of influence does not disappear just because a younger generation starts appearing in more photographs. Which leaves one piece of this puzzle still sitting on the table, the one that actually decides how this entire story ends. Not what Camilla keeps, but what kind of monarchy William is quietly being built to run. Lay every confirmed fact from this investigation side by side, and a very different shape appears than the one the original headline promised. Confirmed: Charles remains king, Camilla remains queen, a title made official at the coronation on May 6, 2023, and rooted in a single sentence Elizabeth II wrote 15 months earlier. William remains Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, a position the Succession to the Crown Act 2013 never altered, since it only applies to royals born after October 28, 2011. Catherine remains Princess of Wales, positioned by law and tradition to become queen herself once William's reign begins. Also confirmed, William drew £21.6 million in private income from the Duchy of Cornwall in the 2025 to 2026 financial year, while King Charles III drew £25.2 million from the separate Duchy of Lancaster in that same period. The sovereign grant, funded largely by a surge in offshore wind profits at the Crown Estate, jumped more than 50% to £132.1 million in that same period. None of these numbers required anyone's title to change. They simply describe an institution getting financially and constitutionally ready for its next transition, the same way it has before every transition in modern memory. What remains speculation, clearly labeled as such: how visible each royal will be 5 or 10 years from now, how patronages will be redistributed as engagements shift toward William and Catherine, and whether the public's decades-long ambivalence about Camilla ever fully resolves. Royal commentators have offered opinions on all three, from a public relations standpoint and otherwise. None of them are confirmed facts, and this investigation will not pretend otherwise. The verdict, based only on what the record actually shows: there was no shocking announcement removing Camilla from anything. What happened instead was quieter and, in its own way, more interesting. An institution built to outlast every person inside it has spent 3 years visibly preparing for a future king and a future queen without ever needing to publicly diminish the king and queen currently on the balcony. That leaves an old, uncomfortable question sitting underneath this entire investigation: whether reducing someone's visibility counts as cruelty, or whether it is simply the oldest pattern a monarchy has, repeating itself in full view of anyone patient enough to watch. Royal historians remain divided on that point, and probably always will. One thing is not up for debate: this pattern has one more chapter left in it, and the ending is quieter than any headline could ever sell. Go back to where this investigation started: a headline about a shocking announcement that no camera ever actually recorded, and a calendar that, on closer inspection, told a truer story than any headline could. Nothing was signed. No farewell tour was ever booked. No name was quietly erased from any patronage list. What actually happened, across 3 verifiable years of public record, was smaller and slower. A coronation, a shift from queen consort to simply queen, a Duchy of Cornwall report listing £21.6 million, a Succession Act clause almost nobody outside a law library ever reads, and 2 younger royals appearing in more places than before. That is not nothing, but it is not the story the headline promised either. The monarchy has survived 70 years of one queen, and now several years of a new king, for one plain reason: it adapts before it has to. Not because any single person inside it stops mattering, but because every generation eventually learns when to hold a role and when to start preparing the person who will inherit it. Camilla's future was never actually hidden in some secret meeting or private document. It was sitting in public statements, financial reports, and a coronation photograph the whole world already watched live. The palace never announced any of this, Because institutions built to last centuries rarely explain themselves to anyone. They simply keep moving forward and let the record catch up whenever the public finally decides to look at it closely. In the end, this story was never only about Queen Camilla's future. It was about the difficult truth every institution faces. The future cannot arrive until someone is willing to make room for it.